Colleagues, this is Mike Anthony at the University of Michigan. We are live at the Ross School of Business, and I have my colleague Christine Fisher. You can see both of us over here. Summer, things are kind of quiet behind everybody. We have the pleasure of having Dave Panning from the Building Institutional Furniture Manufacturers Association, and he's going to talk to us about a standard he has open for public review. Did I get the name right? Did I get the name right, Dave?
It's the Business and Institutional Furniture Manufacturers Association, so close.
Yeah, I think I fixed it. I think I fixed it here, but I didn't fix it on the other one. So, so what we're talking about is this one. Comments are due on August 1st, and I think I'll open the standard up, and you can speak from your passion about this one. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, sure. Excuse me. BIFMA is a ANSI accredited standards developer, American National Standards Institute, and part of the process with ANSI is to revise standards on a 5-year cycle to keep them fresh, current, relevant. So we're in that process right now of updating the ANSI BIFMA X5.1 office chair standard. This is kind of the workhorse of the North American chair standards. There are other chair standards, but this one by and far covers the bulk of the industry. It's designed for the commercial furniture market, but hence there's no residential furniture standard. This often is by default commercial and residential. So back in 2011, at the last update, the basis for the tests was the 95th percentile male weighing 253 pounds. For this current edition, unfortunately, we in America have gotten heavier, so the 95th percentile male is now 274 pounds. So the tests reflect that somewhat maybe 10% increase in weight. One of the tests,
you're designing for that weight, and does it mean that? First of all, I want to welcome Terry Davis Flint to the call. We'll catch up with you, Dave and Terry. So you're designing as if all offices had people of that weight, and I ask that because maybe we already know there's always competition among the states for having the healthiest population. So this is a standard that would deal with chairs in Denver, Colorado, or Venice Beach, California, in the same way as it would, say, somewhere in Alabama. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. This is intended to be a universal standard regardless of geographical location in the U.S. We know from some studies that Mississippi has the heaviest folks, and in fact we've done studies in Mississippi at some universities there, and we have, speaking of weight, we have an X5.1 standard, which is intended for the very, very large users. So back to the 5.1 standard. Again, it's based on the 95th percentile male at 274 pounds. That doesn't mean that someone 275 pounds can't use it, or 300 pounds, what have you. It's just the basis for the test. The 511 standard that I mentioned uses the 400-pound individual as the basis for the test. So ideally, a large commercial customer, they'll order thousands of chairs or hundreds of chairs, whatever the quantity may be. We believe that they should be ordering 95% of their chairs based on the 5.1 and a small percentage based on the 5.11 standard.
So in healthcare settings, I imagine that you have, in fact, we talked a little bit about chairs and not just the cleanability aspect, but there are certain clinics in the healthcare settings that need the large chairs. I think that's what you're referring to, right?
That's correct, and probably the healthcare centers or communities probably would have a higher ratio of large chairs, or maybe all large chairs, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this is one of the most fascinating things of standards for me, is that things that people don't normally think about as needing to be standardized or need to have some basis for expectations for safety, performance. That these are always very exciting to me. There was one, if you go on our blog, we had one about sod roofs, turf type roofs. You would not think that there was that much kind of activity going on in turf roofs, but there is. So I don't want to interrupt you, but I find this very fascinating because a large part of our cost structure is just the furniture for educational settings. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe a number around $5 million per year. It seems to me the last I got a number from our interior design people is that the university was spending something on the order of $5 million per year on just on furniture alone. That's just U of M.
Yeah, I could believe that. Commercial facilities such as U of M typically will go through furniture about every 10 years. Now, it might be different at U of M. We're finding that healthcare facilities are even less, maybe 7 years. Reason for that is it's got to look really clean and new in a healthcare facility. So it's not that the furniture wore out, it's just they want that fresh look. So, yeah, it is a considerable market.
Well, we often will say that our industry has a $300 billion annual spend. That includes new construction, about 85–90 billion of new construction, and the rest is the security and the equipment and furniture. You can't have the building without furniture. And so, are there any? So, your organization sets the standard for performance and for. Did I hear quantity? Are you actually? So, suppose you're in a healthcare setting and and you have to design for one of your members has to design for a waiting room, say for an eye clinic or any one of these clinics. That's actually an architectural decision, isn't that right? Your organization doesn't deal with how many chairs you may specify, but rather just how they all perform.
Yeah, that is correct. BIFMA is really a standards, ANSI accredited standards developer. Now our individual members, many of them located here in Michigan, they probably work with their clients in terms of how many folks they can fit per square, area. But no, they're not designing structure or anything whatsoever. That's the architects.
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned we have David Flint, one of my colleagues, who's an elevator expert. I thought I'd mention that in Europe, very often you'll find furniture in the elevators. Have you seen that, Dave?
No, I haven't. Actually, the elevators I've been in Europe, I've found to be smaller than in the U.S. and couldn't fit furniture in them. But that's just the locations I've been. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, no, there are some of them that actually have. What about furniture in elevators, Dave? Dave, this is David Flint. We have 2 Daves on the call today.
It's not allowed.
Is that right? It's not allowed in the United States?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, there's the answer. What, fire load or just egress? Just curious about the principle.
Fire load and egress.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll show you pictures of some Dutch and Italian and Swedish and Danish elevators with furniture in them. So not big furniture.
Mr. Panning is correct in that the elevators in Europe are smaller in actual floor space because they design to a much healthier environment.
They designed for a much healthier environment. What do you mean? The people are healthier, or the buildings or environment? What do you mean?
Yeah, they tend to be less obese.
Oh, okay.
That's fairly consistent with the furniture manufacturers.
Yeah.
Who knew?
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense though.
Yeah, yeah. So Dave, on this one, to get back to this particular standard, so we comments are due on August 1st. What are the kind of concepts in play for this one? It is a revision. I think is it just that you're adjusting upward the new data on population weight? Is that the only? I don't have a copy of it here.
That's the fundamental change in the scope. The various tests have subtle changes to them. I'll give an example of one. I can do more if you desire, but one of the primary tests it's called the backrest strength test. Basically, the seat structure, the seat pan and below, is held rigid in a fixture, and a cable, rope, whatever is attached to the top of the backrest, and then it's pulled on with a large force, and the force is very dependent if it's a functional test or a proof test. But so many chairs nowadays have these really flexible backs. You know, the backs contort to fit the shape of the folks. Again, we're talking commercial furniture, not your typical dining room furniture. That they found that they're basically just pulling these back such that it becomes a tensile test. In other words, the back is laid out flat and you're tugging on it.
Like this one right here, Dave?
Yep, but even more flexible than what you're showing. Really, a lot of backs will just bend. So the angle of the pull, it used to be a 90-degree pull from the plane of the back, is now a 70-degree pull. At least that's the proposal, such that you'll minimize that just doing a tensile type test on the back. So there's changes like that to many of the tests, because just the design of chairs are changing over time, and chairs are really much more flexible. The arms on a lot of chairs, you have multiple axes for pivoting the arms. They'll flex incredibly, so the arm strength tests, those have changed also to accommodate that. So those are the type of changes that we're seeing, in addition to some of the forces based on the population and the weight of the U.S. population.
I tried to show this particular picture. This facility, this space would be very different were it not for the furniture. And that's one of the reasons for picking this. Very often people ask, well, what's your guide for picking pictures for white universities? We try to show as much of our colleagues in the other parts of the industry as possible. So I found this one that kind of featured furniture. It is it creates atmospherics in the space. But when I see it in an educational setting, my mind reflects back into a time when my teachers were always telling us, sit straight up in your chair. And that's why I always like to bring this one up here, because I'm always curious to know, are you getting any flexible chairs in the educational seating area? Ones that flex backward, like you just described?
That, I don't know if that's the situation. The ones that are flexible tend to be for the office workers that are sitting in their chairs all day long. Educational setting, someone's sitting in a classroom for an hour or two, and then they move on to a different environment.
Okay.
I think I've seen them more in educational auditoriums where someone might be in there for several hours, but you probably have a better view of that than I do.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's right over here at the business school. I think sit back, the lectures are becoming more showtime over the years. So I get that. Well, we're coming on to our half-hour limit. I have to ask the tough question I always ask, you know, if you could answer this one, how can we get better value? One of the reasons we do this is that we want to make sure we specify these products at the right you know, at the right level of safety and economy. And we find that without our participation, the person who's actually buying these, that generally, all other things being equal, the person who is not at the meeting is generally paying for the people who are at the meeting. That may be less so in BIFMA, but it was generally understood that participation in standards development, even not just for installation, but for products, that there's a tendency for let's say the manufacturers to put cost and to shift risk onto the user, the owner, who in this case very often has very weak price signals. If you're going to build a library, very often you don't see the furniture broken out. When you do a construction project, very often you can see all the disciplines broken out. There are some, which is not to say that there aren't people along the value chain, the delivery mechanisms for bringing a new building into being that are experts in that area. And I'm sure that there's competitive bidding for furniture. Your members probably are involved in a lot of those processes. But I'll return to my original question: is how do we lower our cost in this particular product, in this particular technology, without compromising safety or contributing or aggravating our sustainability agenda? So that's just a question. How do I get this cheaper, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's important for specifiers, purchasers of furniture, to know that there are several standards out there. BIFMA has 4 standards just for seating alone. We've got the 5.1, which I said that's the volume of the commercial industry. There's the X6.1, which is educational seating, and that does take into consideration different sizes. Also, I know you deal with college, but that considers small children also. There's the 511, which is the large occupant standard, which I mentioned earlier. And then there's the lounge and public seating. So for a specifier and purchaser to know these different standards, to work with the manufacturer and say, you know, I don't need this or that. We can focus in on what I really need. And, you know, because I think the manufacturers will work with you, but if the specifier's got knowledge of these, I think they can be a much more savvy purchaser.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think there's anything in the, and it's hard for you to say this, but I would ask, is there anything in the standard which is a little bit excessive in its shifting of risk to the user, to the final fiduciary? We see this a lot in, I'm trying to think of a couple of elevator, almost every technology we have, manufacturers who can afford to get to the meetings generally are able to say, well, we want this risk to be borne by the by the owner. I can't think of any technology that goes into our buildings where the manufacturer wants to put more of the life cycle risk onto the owner. And in many cases, it's justified because they cannot be responsible. Say backflow prevention, it's a very essential technology.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to want where we say we like to see some of the we like to see the product built better up front, better lubrications, for example, something that would enable better access or maintenance, and they're not interested in that. They know.
Well, as you pointed out earlier, This 5.1 standard is open for public comment right now until August 1. So anyone can comment on this. Because it's the ANSI consensus process, the voting block is made up of manufacturers, it's made up of users, made up of general interest, test labs, there's balance. So it is a consensus process. The risk is based on what the users and the manufacturers agree to. My opinion is the risk is the manufacturers are conservative. They do not want, example, chairs breaking in the marketplace. That's just something they don't want to happen. So in terms of risk, the users are paying for minimal risk. They're getting products that very likely are not going to fail on them in use.
Okay, that's just, I had to ask that question.
Yeah.
It's always a touchy one. We save it for the end. So go ahead, Christine.
Well, it's just I think Mike has experience over time with certain standards that affect education facilities industry, in which that wouldn't necessarily always be the case, in which manufacturers do pass along more costs to the user owner or advance their own economic agenda at the expense of the user owner. If the user owner isn't fully or well represented at the table in standards development, then that voice is not necessarily heard, hence this advocacy project. So that it's understandable, though, that not every issue, not every industry that affects the facilities industry and education would necessarily have that approach or that agenda. And it's good to know that.
Do you have, Dave, among the users on this particular standard, are there purchasers that are large universities or college school districts?
No, and we'd sure welcome that. I don't think the educational purchasers have been well represented.
Yeah, now that's true, and I want to say that in bright line colors. Hey, everybody, that's the case almost everywhere. And as I try to point out, that we are the largest non-residential building construction market in the United States. We build more than Microsoft makes money every year, practically. I think Microsoft does $90 billion, and it's always very odd for us, and we find it very difficult for the leadership to even grasp $300 billion of annual spend. They're all dealing with, $500 million, maybe $10 billion budgets. But the idea that you can bang out $1 billion or $2 billion, maybe even 10 out of your cost structure every year just by undergoing this process is not something they're acclimated to. So long story short, we always remind it, and that's the reason your standards are very clean and well-run suite. Trust me, I know. I work with nearly 300 of them, and yours is as clean as they get. And a classy outfit that's also from the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. So I guess since we have David and Gwen on the call, Gwen, do you have any questions? This is a little outside your what you expected, but this is what an open office hours is all about. You have a chance to ask questions about furniture.
I think you're right. I just find it fascinating. I had no idea there was this much thought going into any of this. Not an elevator, not furniture. This is fascinating. Thank you for your time and explaining all of that.
David, Dave Flint, anything?
I just wanted to clarify the answer about furniture. When you were talking about furniture and elevators, that's movable furniture. It's not allowed under variance, and that you can get benches put in, but it's mainly to protect the end user of the equipment from debris hitting them should the safety application set in the elevator. So just to clarify.
Okay. Well, when I think about it, I actually have seen furniture with a back on it in elevators. And I'll have to get that. That's a dig through my old. Because I thought it was, in fact, Dave, to be honest, I think I took a picture of it for you with my iPhone. So I'm sure there's not an elevator class, but I'm sure with an aging population, it strikes me that there's a new area for Dave's, the members, to look into. Elevator-ready furniture. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this recording, and we can talk freely. So this is the end of the recording, and we'll upload this on our video channel very shortly, and on today's agenda item. So thanks very much for your time.